I love my family. Family has always been important to me. Stay-at-home mom, a dad that worked very hard, 2 to 3 jobs a week. He was a worker. If your hands weren't dirty, he said you didn't work today. I'm the oldest. I have a sister, Kelly, and a brother, Ray. It was a really good childhood.
Tracy Wygant comes from a devout Catholic family in upstate New York. In the 1960s, she is a child growing up in an idyllic suburban life.
A lot of neighborhood kids hung out all day on their bikes. My parents had an above-the-ground pool.
My mom would make everybody lemonade and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Everybody came to our house to swim, and people wanted to be in our house.
Including the nuns of St. Mary's from the local convent, who adopt the Wygant family as their own.
They came to our house for picnics. The neighbors would see a carload of nuns getting out and sitting in the back with us and barbecuing.
My dad worked at Mount St. Mary's convent. He was their plumber, and he ended up doing everything. We would go for Mass on Christmas Eve down at their church. Being with these sisters, the Catholic religion, it was constantly there. It's just really special to have them in our lives.
Tracy is so sheltered by her family life, she is tormented when one day she finds herself the target of a bully at school.
There was one instance where we were on the bus and he made fun of her and she started crying. I had a pickle in a jar from a science class experiment that I forgot was in my duffel bag. When he was walking off the bus, I swung my duffel bag and hit him across the back of the head. I'm sure it hurt, and I told him to leave my sister alone.
The problem with me, I was very shy and very timid.
My sister Tracy is the older sister. She's 3 years older than I am. But I really do believe that that is the day where I took on that role of trying to protect her.
When I turned 18, I went to Mount St. Mary's College in Newburgh in 1978, and then I just went into teaching.
Between studying and a part-time job, Tracy doesn't go out much.
When I was in college, I didn't dorm in this school. I wanted to be home.
But one day, when a friend asks her out on a double date, she accepts, and it's a date with destiny.
We decided to go out for dinner, and she comes with a man. He's a very nice-looking man. Brown hair, mustache, because they were big back in those days. And we seemed to talk a lot.
Tracy finds herself ignoring her date and is attracted to her friend's date, whose name is Chris Chanowitz. He's a local guy who works at a commercial offset printers.
He comes from a family of 5 kids. He grew up Catholic in the town of Newburgh, about 10 minutes from where I lived. I did think he was cute.
Tracy doesn't see Chris again until a few months later when she spots him outside a mall in Newburgh.
Kelly and I were going out for dinner, and I pointed Chris out to my sister, and she said, "Go give him your phone number." I remember being very nervous, and I went up to him and I said, "Call me sometime." And he called me the next day.
On their first date, Chris and Tracy go out for pizza and hit it off. Tracy has never had a serious boyfriend, and soon she is falling in love.
I had butterflies in my stomach, and I couldn't eat. I felt that feeling like lovesick or something. And then when I would come out of college, he would leave notes for me on my car. And every week he gave me a rose. I couldn't wait to go to my car and see the note. Like, you know, that was fun. That was like happiness.
Chris liked her because She has a good heart. She's sensitive. She's sweet. She was about to have a career. She treated him really, really well. She made him a priority in her life. He seemed absolutely perfect for her.
On Halloween night, just 8 months after they meet, Chris plans a special surprise.
We were going out to the movies, and he was really late. And I was mad that he was late. And he gave me a plastic pumpkin, and inside was all this candy. And I looked, and there was a box. It was a diamond engagement ring. He never really came out and said, "Would you marry me?" or anything like that. It was like typical me. Took it, put it on, we're getting married. None of the words were said.
We felt happy for Tracy when she got engaged. We did like Chris, and we were happy that he was going to be a part of our family.
It felt good. It felt romantic. We got married in the convent.
I was the maid of honor at Tracy's wedding. Tracy got married at the Dominican Sister Mother House Chapel. We always described it as like being in The Sound of Music. Right in front of you was the Hudson River. It was a dream of my parents for us to get married there.
It's all marble, all white, and all the nuns were there. My limo broke down. We got to the church late, and one of Chris's friends told me that he was upset. He was worried because I was late. And that always made me feel happy. That he cared for me, that he loved me. That made me happy.
Soon, the newlyweds move into an apartment and settle into a routine.
He left the commercial offset printers and he worked for Texaco Company, and then he got a job in IBM. I was teaching in Newburgh. I got hired in August of that summer, '84.
Chris works the night shift on an assembly line.
And so I was home every night by myself, and I hated that. My sister, Kelly, and my mom, we would go out shopping on Saturdays. So Friday nights, a lot of times I went and I slept at my parents' house.
Tracy finds her first year especially challenging.
The discipline was so tough on me. I remember cans of crayons being thrown over my head, and it was very, very difficult on me. He went to work with me crying in the bathroom, in the corner, hysterical, like having a nervous breakdown, because the behavior was so bad, and I couldn't get a handle on it. I didn't know what to do. If he gave me some love, some hugs, telling me it's going to be okay, I probably would have been great, because that's all I needed. But he didn't.
Tracy has her heart set on buying land and building her dream home, but it is difficult to save money. Chris gets a second job at a local business as a salesman.
He got a job at a woman's store with all women. And then women would leave notes on his car. It didn't matter if they were pretty, ugly, didn't matter what they looked like, he still flirted with them. Women shouldn't be leaving notes on his car. He's a married man.
Tracy complains to Chris about his flirting, but he doesn't stop.
He never hesitated telling Tracy that other women were looking at him. He did like to make her insecure, because then she clung on to him a little bit more, and he liked that attention.
After 4 years, they're no closer to buying a home. So Tracy and Chris come up with a new plan to save money.
We gave up the apartment, and I went to my parents' house, and he went to his parents' house. We lived off my paycheck and put his in the savings. I just never knew what he made. He never brought a paycheck home and showed me.
Tracy asked him if she could go stay at his parents as well. And he said there was no need for that she was better off in her house, in her own bedroom. We just thought it was all so weird. It was hard on the marriage, and Tracy cried a lot. She wanted to be with him, and he just kept saying to her, "You want a house, don't you? This is what we have to do to get the house."
For 2 years, Tracy and Chris continue their unusual arrangement, seeing each other as much as their busy schedules allow. Finally, their sacrifice pays off. They save enough to buy their own home, or at least Tracy does.
She has to pay for it all. We don't know where he would have the money saved for any of this.
We decided we were going to get a piece of land and put a modular home on there. We put a down payment on a home.
But before they break ground, in front of friends and family, Chris drops a bombshell that will ruin everything.
He told me he was in love with another woman. Her name was Shannon. He said that he was backing out of building a house. It was awful.
So Shannon was a woman who worked at the mall, who Tracy would see him talking to all the time, and never thought he would ever be with her. But what was even more shocking was Tracy's reaction to it. Tracy fell to her knees, held onto his leg, cried, and told him not to leave her.
Being a nice Catholic girl, you don't get divorced. I didn't know what to do.
Tracy Wygant's husband, Chris, has just told her he is having an affair with another woman.
Basically, what I did is put my head in the ground. It was sad. I didn't know where to turn, what to do. I didn't tell my friends.
He was done. But he wasn't done for her.
This is all I got. How am I going to get anything in the future if I don't fight for him?
6 months go by. Tracy continues to live at home, hoping Chris will eventually reconcile.
I had to go and get the money back for the down payment. There was no talk of divorce. And I would go to the church where we got married, and I would go in there by myself and just pray for everything to get better. And I would do that a lot.
And then one day, he shows up at her work unexpectedly.
And he had with him pamphlets for condos. So we started looking at condos. I was hopeful, because why would he do that?
Chris tells her he is no longer seeing the other woman.
I'm thinking everything's back, everything's fine. She doesn't exist anymore. It's done.
Tracy and Chris start afresh, and instead of buying a condo, they find another piece of land.
It's in Walk Hill area, out by the Schwanga Mountains, and we picked out a house from a magazine. It wasn't like he was being all sweet and nice. I just settled and just kept going.
Within a few months, Tracy finds out she's pregnant.
When you have a body growing inside of you, it's wonderful and weird at the same time. It was also a very difficult time. We were building a house, and I'm pregnant.
Chris, he's going to be the best. He's going to build a house. He's going to make it bigger and better than everybody else's. Did they have the money for it? No. He hired people he knew, then didn't pay them. They were in debt.
Just as they finish building their new house, their daughter Taylor is born in February 1991.
Come see baby Taylor. This is baby Taylor's first Easter.
She was just absolutely beautiful.
Taylor.
Long Goldilocks hair, gorgeous.
Oatmeal and banana.
Yum, 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 yum.
Tracy goes back to work after 3 months of maternity leave. Chris is on night shift, so he takes care of Taylor during the day.
Chris took Taylor to the zoo, the park. He would meet other people, women with children, and I'm sure that he was flirting with other women. He would fulfill that role of the mother and the father with Taylor, because Tracy was working.
If we were at my sister's for a picnic, he would be with all the kids. And he would knock the parents down and say, oh, I'm down here with their kids, like he was the greatest.
Santa Claus was here. Look at all your presents.
Daddy, can I open some?
Can you open them? Sure can. Merry Christmas. Where's my Merry Christmas kiss?
Years go by, and Taylor grows closer to her dad, who seems to do all the fun things.
Hey, you.
I think most of my field trips, my dad came on as the parent.
Hi, I'm Taylor, and I'm at Macy's Parade. This is the fireman.
During parties, you would find him in the pool with us, having fun. My dad was always involved, always playing with the kids.
Hey, good girl.
But Chris has little time for Tracy, and their marriage suffers.
He said I have a stomach, so no sex. That was awful. We did Nutrisystem, and I got really skinny, and he still said I had a belly.
We felt that he was having an affair because there was just really no desire, no connection. And it was frustrating for me because I knew my sister was believing his lies.
Inside, I'm dying. No intimacy. I would cry and I would beg him, and he would go like this at me. Oh, really?
When her sister Kelly's family visits Disney World, Tracy suggests they join them, hopeful that a vacation might rekindle their intimacy.
Tracy really looked forward to that. The whole family walking around Disney World.
We took out a loan to take Taylor. We were together, and one night I woke up in the middle of the night and he was gone. I don't know where he was.
She said that Chris kept disappearing. We would be waiting for the parade, and he'd say, oh, he's gonna go buy Taylor or something, and he'd be gone for hours. She goes, I just have a feeling that he wasn't alone.
I was hoping for a change. I just kept waiting for that miracle to happen.
After they return, and just when Tracy is at her emotional bottom, her sister calls with more devastating news.
She told me that our mom died.
My mom's death was awful for us.
Chris had no choice. He had to be with me during that time. And then I had him go up to the casket and tell my mom not to worry, that he always would be there for me. I had him tell her that. And then it was Thanksgiving weekend. My family has a cabin in the Catskills with a gun club. So Chris says he's going up to the cabin and go hunting. And my sister could not believe that he was leaving me after my mom just died.
He would tell my father that real men don't stay in the cabin. They go off and they get a tent and they sleep in the woods.
Chris and Tracy's dad go to the cabin, but Chris disappears.
Now, Chris had a hunting gun, but he didn't hunt.
And my father, he searched to see if he could find him. And he followed his tracks, and then they just stopped.
There was no tent. He disappeared.
Chris has been picked up on the road outside the cabin by another woman. Someone who Taylor has already met.
My first memory of meeting another woman was going to the Ulster County pool. My dad told me he was going to meet a friend of his from work, and she had a little girl with her too. We remember playing with all of them in the pool. She was a few years younger than me.
Taylor plays with the little girl named Megan on more than one occasion.
We went hiking together one time up in Minnewaska. It was definitely a few times he had me go meet her. He was treating both of us kind of the same. It was bothering me. And she kept calling him Dad.
Tracy's daughter Taylor meets another girl who is calling her father Dad.
He said that she didn't have a father of her own, so he was trying to step into that role for her. And then he would make me pinky swear not to tell my mom anything about what we did.
Taylor told me that her father and her went with this other woman to some falls up by Kingston, New York. And he has her pinky swear not to tell me. And then when I questioned him about it, he just said it was a friend he ran into.
Tracy's a smart person. And I think that somewhere inside, she definitely didn't believe him. But she was so afraid of bringing it to the surface because she didn't want the consequences of what would happen to their marriage.
I was waiting for things to get better. It would get better, it would get better. I hang in there.
I feel like at my private shower, my baby shower.
In February of 1998, Taylor celebrates her 7th birthday. By this time, everyone but Tracy seems to be on to Chris.
I think that's the last birthday I remember with my father being there.
We believe that he's living a double life. He is off buying things and telling my husband that he has charge cards that Tracy doesn't know about. And I think he's doing it just to add fuel to all of our fire.
By the time summer arrives, Tracy and Chris have not been intimate for over 4 years.
I thought he was gay for a while. There was a manager at IBM that he kept talking about that was gay, that he hung out with, and also the lack of sex for years. So it was making me think, well, geez, maybe he is gay. I did ask questions, but they were always lies. I was gagging and throwing up. That's how bad I was. Crying. Felt like I didn't have anybody in the world.
In September, at the start of the school year, Chris starts spending time alone in the garage. He tells Tracy that he is working on something special for her.
He said to me, I have a surprise for you. Don't tell your sister about it. And I told her, because I thought it was going to be something romantic.
She just was really excited about it. And I think she felt that it was going to make their marriage better.
I was excited. I couldn't wait for my surprise.
Chris even puts up garbage bags to black out the windows in the garage so that Tracy can't peek.
I heard noises. I don't know exactly what he was doing. We also bought unfinished furniture that he would paint and stain over the years. So it could be something like that. To me, he was working on my surprise. So I didn't want to open the door and ruin it and peek.
Hey, honey.
As the weekend approaches, Chris seems to be more flirtatious.
He picked me up, and I got embarrassed, and I got shy, and I asked him to put me down. He never picked me up before, never. And I was uncomfortable with that because I'm heavy. Within a few hours later, he had me move a ladder. And I thought it was strange that he didn't do it. He had me do it.
That's great. Great.
On the evening of September 12th, 1998, Chris, Tracy, and Taylor arrive home early from a dinner with friends.
He told me about the surprise. He was getting the surprise ready. And I went to the living room while he was out in the garage.
While Taylor sleeps upstairs, Tracy waits in anticipation.
He comes in and gets me and tells me the surprise is ready. He put a blindfold around my eyes, tightened it up.
Chris places an envelope in Tracy's hand.
He told me it was part of the surprise.
She thought maybe it was airline tickets, and she was hoping it was a trip.
And he had to help me out to the garage. I was okay with it because when somebody's going to surprise you, sometimes they do that. They put blindfold on you. He opens the door and then puts me at the first step. So I'm out on the first step. He's behind me. He tells me the surprise is not ready.
Chris leads Tracy back to the couch, removes the blindfold, and she waits again.
He comes back out to the living room and tells me the surprise is ready now. He had to do a couple things. So we go through the same routine. Opens the door, helps me down to the first step.
Come on this way.
It wasn't ready. Again.
No, it's not
We go
ready.
back in. I go right back to the couch.
Finally, the surprise is ready. Chris re-blindfolds Tracy and again places the envelope in her hand.
Now it's just quiet. And I can hear him breathing behind me. Now I'm starting to get suspicious. Now I'm starting to get a little nervous.
He leads her into the garage, and Tracy waits again for what seems like eternity.
My heart was pounding out of my chest. I felt something come down my neck.
Tracy Wygant's husband, Chris, has just slipped a noose over her head.
And my reaction was to hit it off. And I quickly hit the blindfold up off me and looked up, and he was above me, and he had big gloves on. And I saw him holding the rope with a noose. I went into an out of my body experience, like numb. Is this really happening? It could have been a diamond, it could have been a pearls, but it wasn't. It was a noose.
She was seconds away from death. Seconds. He was going to pull Tracy up by the noose. He was going to hold on to it until she was dead.
I looked up and I said to him, "What's going on?" And he let the noose go and he went to the corner of the garage. And he was crying. He said that he was in love with another woman and we have a child.
Tracy doesn't consider that she might still be in danger.
I thought about it more afterwards. Like, how stupid was I thinking that maybe he wouldn't take a gun and shoot me? He could have easily done that. I was shaking at this time and I said, "I'm going to call my sister."
We were sound asleep, and it was Tracy. She was crying hysterically and wanted me to come up there. Like now. I called my father and asked him to come up to Tracy's. And I said, "It's bad news. I bet it's an affair again." I went to the front door, and Chris opened the door. He looked disheveled, tired. He looked like a monster. I turned and saw Tracy sitting on the couch, and she was rocking, and she was crying. So I knelt down next to her, and I said, "Tracy, what's going on? Tell me what's happening." And she said, "He has another woman and a child. Her name is Megan." And I could tell she was trying to process it. And I turned to look at him, and I said to him, that was your surprise? This is your surprise?
Chris sees Tracy's father coming and leaves to go meet him outside.
That gave me the opportunity to say to Tracy, that was your surprise? And she said, no, he tried to hang me in the garage. At that point, I went into the garage area. The windows were all blackened out with black plastic bags. The ladder was standing there, and there was the noose.
She said, Tracy, I have to call the police. I'm begging her not to call the police.
Kelly calls 911.
Everything was definitely surreal that night. Everything seemed to go in slow motion.
Tracy tells Kelly that she asked Chris why he wanted to kill her.
And he said, you made me do this to you. And she said, why? What did I do? What did I do wrong? And he said, you made me do this. You would never let me go. This is bad. This is really bad. I'm very concerned about my sister because I think she's going to have a severe mental breakdown.
Tracy's dad is startled when police arrive on the scene.
And he said, why would you call the police? This is just an affair. And I looked at my father and I said, no, it's not, Dad. He tried to hang her in the garage. At that point, my father just leapt through the air and jumped on Chris. And that's when the police quickly grabbed my father and Chris.
The officers escort Chris into another room.
He was pacing and wringing his hands. He kept apologizing. He says, I wanted to do a double suicide. I wanted to kill my wife and then kill myself. I'm like, now you know that's not a double suicide. We call it murder-suicide. I said, well, how are you going to kill yourself? He says, well, I got a gun. He showed me the gun. It was in a closet, all the way back in the closet. I found a .308 that was in there. I'm like, okay, where's the ammo? I don't know. Okay, and how are you going to off yourself with a gun if there's no ammo available? Something's not right.
Chris is arrested, but only for menacing and endangerment.
He had me move the ladder to get my prints on the ladder. Him having me hold the note was going to be a suicide letter. And he picked me up because he wanted to see how he could pull me to hang me. The police say when the surprise wasn't ready that he was trying to get his nerve up. If he did what he was going to do the first time, maybe even the second, he would have succeeded.
Tracy ended up in a psychiatric hospital.
It's like being hit with a double blow. The love of your life has just tried to kill you. You get out of it, and then he hits you with the other blow that kills your heart, it kills your soul.
The next morning, Kelly races to gain emergency custody of Taylor before Chris makes bail. Tracy Wygant spends a week in a psychiatric hospital trying to understand why her husband tried to kill her.
He wanted to look like I committed suicide.
He wanted to look like the victim. Everybody would have been crying for him and feeling bad for him, and he would have came out victorious.
If Chris had succeeded, he would have avoided a custody battle for Taylor.
He would have got the house. He would have got money from the New York State Teachers Union. They would have been set and they would live happily ever after, the four of them in the house. That was his goal.
It was cheaper to pay for a funeral than a divorce lawyer. I believe she saved her own life.
Tracy would never have divorced him. Even after that night, I don't think she wanted to divorce him.
After Tracy returns home from the hospital, she gets full custody of Taylor and then searches the house for evidence of Chris's double life.
I found special holiday cards, letters, fake divorce papers, mail-in divorces.
I'm sure he was showing his girlfriend that he was going through a divorce.
Proof positive that Chris was seeing other women throughout their marriage.
One card I opened up and it was a Valentine's card and it had a voice. Happy, happy hard day. We love you very much. Love, Kathy and Taylor. So it was not good for me. So my family almost had to bring me back to the hospital. That was hard.
There was a photo of Shannon in Disney World, the same time that Tracy, Chris, and Taylor took their Disney World trip. So when he was disappearing, he was meeting Shannon.
February 5th, 1999, 5 months after the attack, a grand jury in Ulster County, New York, upgrades Chris's menacing charge to attempted murder in the second degree.
Usually, the one who is unhappy should be the one that takes a drastic measure. But he wanted to maximize his happiness. He wanted to have everything that they had built together to himself. So she was expendable to him.
Just over a year later, in 2000, they go to trial.
He sat there acting like he did nothing wrong. He was the perfect husband who wanted a divorce. That's it.
He told the jury that he was trying to tell me it was over.
His defense was he was just trying to scare her into a divorce because she never would have left him.
The last time I saw my dad was when we went to court, and it was just for a split second. I was set to testify, give my own statements, and I was halfway through the door, and the judge decided he didn't need my testimony, so I was immediately scooched back and out of the room.
Tracy and Kelly take the stand, but the evidence is airtight.
I was in a little bit of a fighting spirit at that time, but still very timid, still beaten up. It was tough with his lawyer, but I held my own.
What I think went wrong with Chris's plan was that he lost his nerve. But I also think that he could have done it.
By unanimous vote, a jury finds Chris Chanowitz guilty of attempted murder, and he is sentenced to 15 years in prison.
I was looking at him when I read my victim response for the sentencing. He wouldn't let me look at him because it was very heartfelt. I cried. Yeah, I was upset. I cried. I did that for a couple weeks.
Tracy and Taylor sell the house and start rebuilding their lives in a new home.
I am proud of how Tracy came out of this. For the last 25 years, she has built a little life for her and Taylor in this house. She has made it a showstopper. People stop and take pictures. She does gardening outside. And that has been her sanctuary.
After serving 13 years, Chris gets out of jail in 2013 and moves back to Wallkill.
I walk up in my front yard to go do something, and there he drives by. We make eye contact sometimes.
I was in Home Depot. I just happened to go around the corner, and there he was. And I started yelling for security. I said there was an attempted murder in the store, and security was running. I told him, you better leave. He almost killed my sister. I was screaming at him on top of my lungs, and he left.
Taylor rejects her father for what he did to her mother. And now Tracy is retired from teaching and has found new love.
Steve worked for the town of Newburgh. He was a fireman for over 50 years. He just loves me so much, and I love him. Matter of fact, I'm missing him right now. He's done so much for me. I hit the jackpot.
She finally has found the perfect man for her who wants to take care of her and who truly, truly loves her. I feel like I have my older sister back.
My mom's very funny. She enjoys goofing off, never really acts her age, always singing and dancing around the house, even if it can drive me crazy sometimes.
I'm able to do it because Steve's in my life. And that's given me the strength. And I think God knows now that I have the strength to do this.
The sky over Oak Ridge Cemetery didn't just leak. It bled a cold, rhythmic gray, a relentless drizzle that turned the manicured grass into a swallowing mire. Funerals are supposed to be about closure, the final period at the end of a long, lived-in sentence. But today, the air feels different. It feels heavy, charged with a static electricity that has nothing to do with the storm. We are standing at the edge of a grave that has been waiting for 30 years. Not for the man in the mahogany casket, but for the truth buried beneath the floorboards of a house 3 miles away. The mourners are a sea of black umbrellas, a huddled mass of grief and whispered secrets, gathered to say goodbye to Arthur Vance, the patriarch of a family defined by a shadow. But as the minister clears his throat, his voice trembling against the wind, the sound of gravel crunching under heavy tires interrupts the sanctity of the Amen. This isn't the arrival of late mourners. This is the sound of the past catching up. Four black SUVs scream to a halt, cutting off the exit. The doors fly open in a synchronized thud that echoes like a heartbeat. Men in windbreakers, the letters FBI and state police, gleaming like silver warnings against the gloom, move with a terrifying, surgical precision. They aren't looking at the casket. They're looking at the front row. They're looking at the man holding the widow's hand. The crowd gasps, a collective intake of breath that seems to suck the very oxygen out of the clearing. This is a cold case that has frozen the blood of this community for 3 decades, a name whispered in grocery store aisles and at Sunday dinners: the Vance disappearance. 1996, a summer night, so humid the air felt like wet wool. A mother, Elena Vance, and her 6-year-old daughter, Chloe, vanished into the ether, leaving behind nothing but a half-eaten dinner and a house that screamed of a struggle no one heard. For 30 years, this family has worn their grief like a badge of honor, a tragic mystery that turned them into local icons of suffering. But today, the badge is being ripped off. The lead investigator, a man whose face is a map of 30 years of sleepless nights and dead-end leads, steps forward. He doesn't offer condolences. He offers handcuffs. The metal clicks a sharp, mechanical death knell around the wrists of the one person no one ever dared to suspect. The arrest shocks community. Headlines are already being written in the minds of the reporters hovering at the gates. This is the moment the facade shatters. This is the moment the family cold case stops being a tragedy and starts being a horror story. Look at the faces in the crowd. Look at the confusion turning into a sickening realization. They remember the candlelight vigils. They remember the missing posters that yellowed and peeled under the relentless sun. They remember the man now being led away in chains, the man who wept the loudest at every anniversary, the man who swore on his soul that he would never stop searching. The betrayal isn't just a sting, it's a physical blow to the gut of every neighbor who ever brought over a casserole or offered a prayer. How does a monster hide in plain sight for 10,000 days? How does a killer sit at the head of the table, carving the Thanksgiving turkey with the same hands that... Well, the details are coming, and they are darker than the mud beneath our boots. The cameras are flashing now, lightning bolts in the afternoon shadows, capturing the image that will dominate every screen in the country tonight. A funeral turned into a crime scene. A morning sun, a pillar of the community, had bowed not in prayer, but in the crushing weight of a secret that finally outgrew its grave. The air is thick with the scent of wet earth and lilies, a cloyingly sweet smell that masks the underlying stench of decay, not just of the body in the casket, but of the lies that held this family together. Every eye is fixed on the suspect as he is shoved into the back of the lead vehicle. There is no protest, no shout of innocence, only a haunting, hollow silence that speaks louder than any confession. We are witnessing the collapse of a 30-year-old lie, a structure of deception built stone by stone, day by day, until it became a fortress. But today, the fortress fell, and as the SUVs roar away, leaving the mourners standing in the mud next to an open grave, the real investigation begins. We have to go back. We have to go back to that humid night in 1996. We have to look at the Manhoy KY law, the strange clues that were overlooked, the evidence that sat in a cardboard box in a dusty basement, waiting for the world to change, waiting for the science to catch up, waiting for the one mistake that every killer eventually makes. This isn't just a cold case solved, it's a reckoning. A national shockwave is radiating out from this damp cemetery, and the tremors are only beginning to be felt. The truth is coming out, and it's going to burn everything in its path. The rain at the cemetery continues to fall, but our minds are racing back, 3 decades deep, into the suffocating humidity of July 14th, 1996. To understand the handcuffs clicking shut in the present, you have to feel the stillness of that Tuesday night in the suburbs of Crestview. It was a night where the cicadas screamed so loud they masked the sound of the world breaking. The Vance household was a picture of mid-90s Americana, a white picket fence, a swing set in the backyard, and a porch light that flickered with a rhythmic, pulsing buzz. Inside, Elena Vance was preparing for a life that would never happen. She was 28, a woman known for her radiant smile and a devotion to her 6-year-old daughter, Chloe, that bordered on the sacred. At 8:15 p.m., a neighbor saw Elena through the kitchen window, her hair tied back, steam rising from a pot on the stove. By 9 p.m., the house was a tomb. When Arthur Vance returned home from a late shift at the local mill, he didn't find a wife or a child. He found a dinner that had grown cold on the table and a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. The scene that met the first responding officers was a paradox that would haunt the department for 30 years. There was no forced entry. The front door was unlocked, swaying slightly in the evening breeze. On the dining table, 2 plates of pasta sat untouched, the sauce having coagulated into a dark, visceral red. A glass of milk, half finished, stood next to Chloe's chair. It looked like a family had simply evaporated mid-meal. But as the investigators moved deeper into the house, the missing narrative took a violent, jagged turn. In the hallway leading to the bedrooms, they found the first Manhoy KY law, the strange clues that defied logic. A single, small shoe, Chloe's favorite red sneaker, lay in the center of the hall, the laces neatly tied. Not kicked off in a struggle, but placed, positioned, as if it were a marker. And then there was the blood. Not a pool, not a spray, but a single, deliberate smear on the floral wallpaper, exactly 3 feet from the floor. It was a fingerprint's worth of hemoglobin, wiped away, but leaving a ghostly trail that the forensic kits of 1996 couldn't quite decode. The Matt Titchby and sent a lightning bolt of terror through Crestview. This wasn't a city where children vanished from their own hallways. The initial sweep of the house revealed something even more chilling. Elena's purse was still on the counter, her car keys dangling from the hook by the door. Her wedding ring, a modest gold band, was found resting in the soap dish in the bathroom. Nothing was stolen. No jewelry was missing, no electronics taken. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was an extraction. As the police tape went up, fluttering like yellow warnings in the night air, the community gathered at the perimeter. They saw Arthur Vance collapsed on his front lawn, his screams of "Where are they?" echoing off the neighboring houses. It was a performance, or a breakdown, that would define the public's perception of him for a generation. He was the grieving husband, the broken father, the man who had lost his entire world in the span of a 40-minute commute. But as the first 48 hours ticked by, the SOC Seongdong deepened as the investigation hit a brick wall of impossibility. The backyard was searched with floodlights that turned the night into a garish, artificial day. 9 units were brought in, their noses pressing into the damp earth, but they lost the scent at the edge of the driveway. It was as if Elena and Chloe had stepped off the face of the earth. The lead detective at the time, a veteran named Miller, noted a detail in his ledger that would remain classified for 3 decades. The air conditioner was running on high, yet the house felt unnaturally warm. And there was the smell, not of decay, not yet, and hun la emoti mui hun la, a strange scent of bleach and lavender that seemed to fight for dominance in the kitchen. It was too clean. The kitchen floor was damp, a detail Arthur explained by saying Elena always mopped after cooking, but the timing didn't fit the half-eaten meal on the table. Why would a woman mop the floor before she finished her dinner? The town of Crestview became a pressure cooker of suspicion and fear. Every local's strange character was hauled in for questioning. Every white van in a 3-state radius was stopped and searched. But the cold case was already beginning to set like concrete. There were no witnesses. No one saw a car speed away. No one heard a scream. The only sound that night was the wind in the oaks and the distant hum of the mill. Investigators began to look at the family itself, the Hohenhau facade of the Vance marriage. Behind closed doors, was there a crack? Was there a reason for a mother to run? But Elena had no secret bank accounts, no suitcases packed in the trunk. She had everything to live for. As the days turned into weeks, the posters of Elena's smiling face and Chloe's toothy grin began to fade under the sun, a visual representation of the hope that was slowly dying. The most haunting detail, the one that kept Detective Miller awake until the day he retired, was the BUPB bien mat, the missing doll. Chloe never went anywhere without a tattered rag doll named Sophie. The doll wasn't in the house. It wasn't in the yard. If a kidnapper had taken them, why take a worthless toy? Or had Chloe reached for it in her final moments of terror? The vacuum of information was filled with rumors. Some said they were buried in the woods. Others whispered about a cult or a runaway mother who finally snapped. But the truth was far more calculated, a masterpiece of domestic horror hidden behind the eyes of the man who is currently holding press conferences on his front porch, begging for their return. The cold case was born in that silence, a 30-year shadow that was about to be pierced by a light no one saw coming. The funeral in the present day wasn't just for a patriarch. It was the final stage of a game played by a man who thought he had outrun time itself. The transition from a missing persons investigation to a cold case doesn't happen with a bang. It happens with a suffocating, incremental silence. By the autumn of 1996, the frantic energy of the search had curdled into a stagnant pool of BTAC, a total deadlock. The FBI had packed their mobile command centers, the local news crews had moved on to the next tragedy, and the town of Crestview began to look at the Vance house not as a crime scene, but as a monument to failure. Arthur Vance remained at the center of this storm, a figure of tragic resilience. He kept Chloe's room exactly as it was, the half-finished coloring book on the desk, the bed made with crisp, floral sheets, the smell of crayons still lingering in the air. This dong-bang of time served a dual purpose. It garnered the sympathy of a nation, and it ensured that no one, not even the most persistent detective, could disturb the dust that might hold a secret. As the years began to bleed into one another, the psychological toll on the community became a palpable weight. Crestview changed. Parents who once let their children roam the streets until the streetlights hummed now kept their doors double-bolted. The SOC Tsongdong morphed into a permanent state of paranoia. Every new face in town was a suspect. Every unidentified car was a predator. The investigation, meanwhile, was relegated to a single, overflowing filing cabinet in the basement of the precinct. Detective Miller, the man who couldn't forget the smell of bleach and lavender, became an island of obsession. He spent his nights staring at the grainy photos of that single red sneaker in the hallway. Why was it there? Why was it so perfectly placed? He began to realize that the crime scene wasn't just a place where something happened. It was a stage where something had been directed. The Manhua KY law grew stranger as the technology of the late 90s failed to provide answers. The blood smear on the wallpaper was too small for the DNA testing of the era. The fingerprints found in the house all belonged to the family or frequent guests. There was no phantom intruder, no foreign DNA to chase. It was a ghost crime. Miller began to look into Arthur's past, digging into the Kuok song High Mat that often hides beneath the surface of a suburban father. He found whispers of a temper, stories of a man who needed total control, but no evidence of violence. Arthur was a ghost himself, no criminal record, no history of instability. He was the perfect victim. He played the part of the grieving widower with such haunting precision that even the skeptics in the department began to feel ashamed for doubting him. Then came the first Bjukkengoat Hut, the false lead that almost broke the case and the town. In 1999, a drifter was arrested 3 states away with a child's rag doll in his possession. The news hit Crestview like a mortar shell. "Is it Sophie?" the headline screamed. Arthur Vance was flown out to identify the toy. For 12 hours, the nation held its breath. But as Arthur sat in that sterile interrogation room, staring at the dirty, matted doll, he simply shook his head and wept. It wasn't her. The air went out of the investigation again, leaving everyone even more exhausted than before. The cold case was becoming a legend, a dark bedtime story told to warn children about the monsters that walk among us. But beneath the surface of the Vu on Betak, the cracks were beginning to form in the foundation of the Vance family's history. Relatives began to pull away. Elena's parents, broken by the lack of closure, moved across the country, unable to look at Arthur without seeing the vacuum of their daughter's life. The community's sympathy started to ripen into a quiet, uncomfortable distance. People stopped bringing casseroles. They stopped asking how he was doing. Arthur became a recluse within his own tragedy, a man who lived in a museum of a night that never ended. He was waiting. He was waiting for the world to forget. He was waiting for the cold case to become truly frozen, buried under 30 years of winter. What Arthur didn't account for was the Su Kien Tri Kwa Bong toy, the persistence of the dark. While he sat in his darkened living room, the world outside was changing. Science was evolving. The tiny, Vo-Hin speck of blood on the wallpaper was sitting in a climate-controlled evidence locker, a ticking time bomb of genetic information. The Bienbo NGO wasn't going away. It was just waiting for a language that could finally speak its name. And as we move toward the 20-year mark, the silence of the Vance house is about to be interrupted by a whisper from the past, a phone call that would reopen the wounds of Crestview and set the stage for the most Chandong arrest in the history of the state. The past isn't dead. It isn't even past. It's just waiting for the right moment to scream. Time is a cruel architect. It buries the truth under layers of routine and apathy, building a new reality on top of unresolved horrors until the original foundation is forgotten. By 2016, 20 years after the night the clock stopped in the Vance household, the cold case had become something worse than a mystery. It had become history. The missing posters were long gone, replaced by digital billboards for smartphones and streaming services. The town of Crestview had expanded, new subdivisions eating up the woods where volunteers once searched with flashlights. A generation had grown up knowing the Vance name only as a cautionary tale, a spooky story told at sleepovers. To them, Arthur Vance was just the quiet, gray-haired man who sat in the back pew at church, the man who never remarried, the man who carried a tragedy so old it had calcified into his bones. He had become a fixture, harmless and pitted, a living monument to a grief that no longer felt sharp. He walked the streets like a ghost in a suit, nodding to neighbors who no longer remembered the sound of his wife's voice. He thought he had won. He thought the silence was permanent. But in the basement of the county sheriff's department, the silence was about to be broken by the hum of a high-tech ventilation system. The cold case unit wasn't a sprawling team of elite agents. It was a small, cramped office staffed by 2 detectives who refused to let the dead stay buried. One of them was Sarah Thorne, a detective who wasn't even 10 years old when Elena and Chloe vanished. She didn't have the baggage of the original investigation. She didn't know Arthur Vance as the weeping father on the evening news. She knew him only as a name in a file that weighed 5 pounds and smelled of mildew. Thorne was part of a new breed of investigators, armed not with hunches and heavy-handed interrogations, but with the terrifying precision of modern forensic science. To her, the BTAC of 1996 wasn't a dead end. It was a puzzle box waiting for the right key. And that key lay in the advancements of DNA technology that Detective Miller could have only dreamed of. Thorne pulled the Vance box from the shelf, the cardboard soft with age. As she opened it, the scent of the past, that strange, chemical smell of preserved evidence, filled the room. She wasn't looking for new witnesses. Witnesses forget. They lie, they die. She was looking for the silent witnesses, the biological markers that never age. Her eyes locked onto the evidence bag containing the swatch of wallpaper cut from the hallway wall 2 decades ago. The vet BN, that single smear of hemoglobin, had been tested in the 90s, but the results were inconclusive, a partial profile that matched Elena, but with noise, ghost markers that the lab technicians of the time attributed to contamination. But Thorne knew that contamination is often just a lazy word for a truth we don't yet understand. She bagged the swatch, sealed it in a modern biosafe container, and sent it to a private lab in Virginia, a facility that specialized in extracting genetic ghosts from degraded samples. While the sample traveled across state lines, Thorne began to reconstruct the timeline with a cold, digital eye. She digitized the handwritten notes of Detective Miller, feeding the chaotic scrawls into a database that could spot patterns the human brain might miss. She saw the discrepancies immediately. The Manhoy KY law of the red sneaker, the clean kitchen, the open window in the master bedroom that had been dismissed because there were no footprints outside. Thorne saw a narrative forming that wasn't about an abduction.
It was about staging.
The sneaker was too perfect. The lack of struggle was too absolute. She realized that the investigation had been looking outward, searching for stranger in a van, when they should have been looking inward, at the architecture of the home itself. She requested the blueprints of the Vance house from the city archives. She studied the layout, the crawl spaces, the insulation. She began to wonder if Elena and Chloe had ever left the property at all. Meanwhile, Arthur Vance was living a life of terrifying normalcy. He had retired from the mill with a pension and a plaque thanking him for his service. He spent his days gardening, tending to beds of roses that were the envy of the neighborhood. There is something profoundly disturbing about a man who can nurture life with hands that might have extinguished it. He attended the annual memorial services, which had dwindled from hundreds of attendees to a handful of die-hard supporters. He would stand at the podium, his voice cracking at the perfect moments, reciting a script of loss that he had perfected over 7,000 days. He felt safe. He believed that the statute of limitations on public interest had expired. He didn't know that 300 miles away, a sequencer was spinning, breaking down the cellular debris on a piece of 20-year-old paper. He didn't know that the noise in the old DNA test was resolving into a clear, undeniable signal. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday, exactly 20 years and 4 months after the disappearance. Thorne received an email that would change the trajectory of the cold case forever. The lab report was dense with scientific jargon, but the conclusion was a sledgehammer. The blood on the wallpaper wasn't just Elena's. It was a mixture. And the secondary profile wasn't from a stranger. It was a familial match. But it wasn't Arthur's. It was male, related to Elena, but not her husband. It was a partial profile of a brother or a cousin, someone who had never been a suspect, someone who lived 1,000 miles away. Or was it? Thorne stared at the data. The science was telling her something impossible. Elena had no brothers. Her father was an only child. Who was this male relative bleeding in the hallway of the Vance home? The mystery deepened, transforming from a simple whodunit into a genetic riddle. Thorne drove to the Vance house, not to arrest Arthur, but to watch. She parked down the street, sitting in the silence of her car, watching the old man prune his roses. She saw the way he moved, methodical, careful, precise. She saw a man who had controlled his environment for decades. But as she watched, she noticed something else. Arthur stopped. He looked up, staring directly at her unmarked car. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just stood there, the shears in his hand glinting in the sun. A chill went down Thorne's spine. It was the look of a predator who smells a shift in the wind. He knew. Somehow, deep in his reptile brain, he knew that the Bong Ma Kwa Ku had returned. The game was no longer solitaire. It was chess. And Thorne had just made the first move. The investigation pivoted. Thorne dug into Elena's family tree, going back generations. She was looking for the source of that mysterious male DNA. Was there a secret affair? An illegitimate child? A hidden sibling? The Bianjia Din expanded, revealing cracks in the portrait of the perfect suburban life. Thorne discovered adoption records sealed in a courthouse 3 counties over. Elena wasn't who she thought she was. Or rather, her biological history was a lie. The DNA on the wall belonged to a biological father Elena never knew she had, or a son she never told anyone about. The implication was staggering. If Elena had a secret son, where was he? And why was his blood in the house on the night she died? The coup SOC was building layer by layer. The narrative of the grieving mother was being rewritten. Was Elena the victim, or was she a player in a drama that predated her marriage to Arthur? Thorne felt the weight of the Su that Chandong pressing down on her. She was peeling back the skin of the case and finding rot underneath. She realized that Arthur Vance wasn't just hiding a murder. He was hiding a secret that could destroy the reputation of the entire family. The arrest at the funeral was still years away, but the fuse was lit in that cramped office in 2016. The cold case was heating up, burning with the friction of lies rubbing against the hard, cold surface of forensic truth. The community of Crestview slept soundly, unaware that the ground beneath them was about to shake. The monster wasn't in the woods. He was in the garden. And the ghosts were gathering, ready to scream. The investigation had moved from the sterile precision of the DNA lab to the dusty, suffocating quiet of the Hall of Records. Detective Thorne sat surrounded by stacks of birth certificates and sealed adoption dossiers, the air thick with the smell of decaying paper and forgotten lives. She was hunting a ghost, a spectral figure whose blood had stained the wallpaper of the Vance home 20 years prior. The DNA had whispered son, but Elena Vance's official biography listed only one child, Chloe. Thorne was looking for the gap in the timeline, the lost year in Elena's teenage history. And deep in the archives of a Catholic charity in a neighboring county, she found it. A birth certificate dated November 1984. Mother, Elena Miller, age 16. Father, unknown. Child's name, Julian. The document was a lightning strike in a silent room. Elena hadn't just been a mother to Chloe. She was a mother to a ghost, a boy she had surrendered to the state a decade before she vanished. Thorne felt the chill of realization crawl up her neck. The mystery blood belonged to Julian. In 1996, Julian would have been 12 years old. The timeline snapped into a terrifying focus. The cold case wasn't just about a missing woman and her daughter. It was about a reunion that had turned into a slaughter. Thorne began to dig into Julian's history, tracing the path of a child bounced through the foster system, a boy described in social worker notes as intelligent but troubled, a runner, a seeker. And then, the final, damning piece of the puzzle, a missing persons report filed by a foster family in July 1996, 2 days before the Vance disappearance. Julian had run away. He hadn't run into the void. He had run to the only blood connection he knew. He had run to find his mother. The narrative of that humid July night rewrote itself in Thorne's mind, transforming from a domestic tragedy into a Shakespearean horror. Picture it, a 12-year-old boy, desperate and driven by a need for belonging, knocks on the door of the white picket fence house. Elena, shocked, perhaps terrified, perhaps overjoyed, lets him in. They are in the hallway. Maybe she is touching his face, looking for her own eyes in his. And then, the front door opens. Arthur Vance comes home. The perfect husband, the man who demands total control, walks in to find a stranger, a living, breathing piece of his wife's secret past, standing in his sanctuary. The blood on the wall wasn't from a random struggle, it was from a child. a 12-year-old boy. The violence of that realization made Thorne's stomach turn. Arthur didn't just kill his wife and daughter, he eliminated an intruder who threatened to shatter his carefully constructed reality. But where was Julian? If Arthur had killed him, he had to dispose of 3 bodies, not 2. The logistics of the crime expanded, becoming more complex and more gruesome. Thorne realized that the attack of the original investigation came from a fundamental misunderstanding of the victim count. They were looking for a woman and a girl. They never looked for the boy. And, because no one knew Julian was there, no one missed him in that context. He was just another runaway in a state full of them, a statistic that never crossed the desk of the Crestview police. Arthur Vance had banked on this anonymity. He had banked on the world not caring about a foster kid with a backpack full of dirty clothes. It was a gamble of breathtaking cruelty, and for 20 years, it had paid off. Thorne needed more than a theory. She needed proof that Julian had been there. She needed to place him inside that house beyond the shadow of a DNA probability. She returned to the evidence box, digging past the wallpaper swatch, past the crime scene photos, to the bag containing the contents of the kitchen trash can, garbage that had been collected and stored but deemed irrelevant at the time. Inside, amidst the wrappers and coffee grounds, she found it. A crumpled bus ticket, dated July 14, 1996. One way. From the city where Julian's foster home was located to Crestview. It was buried at the bottom of the bag, stained with spaghetti sauce, a piece of trash that was actually a death warrant. Julian had made it. He had sat at that table. The extra plate of pasta wasn't a mistake. It wasn't for a phantom. It was for him. This sou that chandong was now a physical weight in Thorne's hands. She imagined the scene, the awkward, tentative dinner. Elena trying to bridge a decade of silence over a plate of spaghetti. Chloe staring at the big brother she never knew she had. And then, the headlights sweeping across the window. The panic. The explosion of violence. The Manhoi KY law of the red sneaker in the hall took on a new, heartbreaking significance. Had it been dropped in the chaos? Or had Arthur used it to taunt? The cruelty of the man began to sharpen. He wasn't just a killer. He was an eraser. He had wiped an entire branch of a family tree off the face of the earth in a single night. Thorne knew she couldn't move on Arthur yet. The cold case rules were strict. She needed the bodies. The bus ticket and the DNA proved Julian was there and likely hurt, but without remains, a defense attorney could spin a story of a family reunion, a nosebleed, and a runaway boy who left before the parents vanished. Arthur was smart. He had 30 years to build his defense. To catch him, to truly nail the coffin shut on this VUNBN, Thorne had to find the graveyard. She had to find where he put them. And she knew that a man like Arthur, a man of routine and control, wouldn't dump them in a random ditch. He would keep them close. He would put them somewhere he could see, somewhere he could own. Her eyes drifted to the aerial photos of the Vance property taken in 1996 and then again in 2016. The house hadn't changed. The fence was the same. But the garden had evolved. The rose beds had expanded, shifting shape, growing larger and more intricate with each passing year. The Ku Vuan Dia Dang that Arthur tended with such devotion wasn't just a hobby. It was a map. Thorne felt a cold resolve settle in her chest. The bodies weren't in the woods. They weren't in the lake. They were fueling the roses. The Bienbo NGO was blooming right in front of the neighborhood's eyes every spring. It was time to bring the ground-penetrating radar. It was time to disturb the earth. The silence of the garden was about to end. The warrant didn't come with a bang. It came with a terrifying, bureaucratic silence of a judge's signature at 3 a.m. Detective Thorne held the paper in her hand like a weapon, the ink still smelling faintly damp, a legal permission slip to tear apart a man's soul. The sun hadn't even begun to bleed over the horizon when the convoy rolled out, a silent procession of unmarked sedans and a heavy, lumbering forensic van that looked more like a hearse than a tool of justice. They weren't heading to a drug den or a warehouse. They were heading to the most celebrated garden in Crestview, a sanctuary of petals and thorns that had won the Best in County ribbon 4 years running. To the sleeping world, this was a desecration. To Thorne, it was an excavation of hell. They arrived under the cover of a bruised, purple pre-dawn sky. The streetlights were still humming their electric buzz, casting long, distorted shadows across the wet pavement. The Vance house sat in the darkness, the white siding glowing like a bone in the moonlight. It looked peaceful. It looked innocent. That was the lie of suburbia, the idea that evil looks like a monster, when in reality, it looks like a freshly painted shutter or a perfectly trimmed hedge. The team moved with the practiced quiet of grave robbers. There were no sirens, no flashing lights, just the soft crunch of tactical boots on asphalt and the heavy slide of the van door opening. Out came the equipment: shovels, sifters, evidence tents, and the centerpiece of the operation, the ground-penetrating radar, a machine that looked like a lawnmower designed by NASA, built to see through the veil of the earth and expose the scars beneath. Arthur Vance was already awake. Of course he was. The guilty don't sleep. They just wait. The porch light flicked on, a yellow eye opening in the dark, and there he stood. He was wearing a bathrobe over his pajamas, looking every bit the frail, confused senior citizen. He didn't shout. He didn't run. He just stood there, gripping the railing, his knuckles white, watching as the police tape was unspooled across his driveway. It was a calculated image of vulnerability. He knew the neighbors were starting to wake up. He knew the silhouette of an old man facing down a government intrusion would play well in the court of public opinion. He was banking on the town's pity, a currency he had hoarded for 30 years. But Thorne didn't look at him. She couldn't. If she looked at him, she might scream. She kept her eyes on the ground, on the lush, verdant soil of the rose beds that wrapped around the side of the house. The roses were magnificent. Even in the gloom, the heavy heads of the crimson glory and peace, varieties nodded in the breeze. They were vibrant, impossibly healthy, their leaves a deep, waxy green. Thorne felt a wave of nausea roll through her gut.
She knew why they were so healthy.
She knew what they were feeding on. The concept of blood and bone meal wasn't just a gardening term here. It was a literal recipe. The forensic anthropologist, a woman named Dr. Eris who had spent more time with the dead than the living, walked the perimeter. She wasn't looking at the beauty. She was looking for depressions, for subtle shifts in the topography that indicated the earth had been disturbed and then resettled. Nature hates a vacuum, and it hates a lie. Eventually, the ground sinks. Eventually, the earth tries to tell you where the hollow spaces are. The operation began with the GPR. The operator pushed the cart slowly over the manicured grass, the wheels leaving tracks in the dew. Back and forth. A grid pattern. A game of battleship played with the soil. On the monitor, the strata of the earth appeared as waves of gray and black. Topsoil. Subsoil.
Clay. Bedrock.
They were looking for the anomaly, the interruption in the natural layer cake of geology. A place where the layers were mixed, jumbled by a shovel 30 years ago. The sound of the machine was a low, rhythmic hum, a drone that seemed to synchronize with the pounding of Thorne's heart. The neighborhood was waking up now. Curtains twitched. Porch lights flicked on like dominoes. The SOC Tsongdong was beginning to ripple outward. The text messages started flying. Why are the police at Arthur's? Are they digging up the garden? The rumor mill, dormant for decades, roared back to life with a vengeance. Arthur finally spoke. He came down the steps, his slippers wet from the mist. "You're destroying them," he said, his voice trembling. Those were her favorites. "You're killing her memory." It was a masterstroke of manipulation. He wasn't talking about the bodies. He was talking about the flowers. He was framing the investigation as an assault on Elena's legacy, not a search for her remains. A young officer looked at Thorne, hesitation in his eyes. This is how cold cases stay cold. The emotional weight of the suspect overpowers the cold logic of the evidence. Thorne stepped forward, her voice like cutting glass. "Mr. Vance, step back behind the tape. Now." She didn't offer an explanation. She didn't apologize. She just pointed to the line that divided his world of control from her world of consequences. Then, the GPR operator raised a hand. The hum stopped. "I have something," he said. The words hung in the damp air, heavy and absolute. He pointed to the screen. There, amidst the uniform waves of the subsoil, was a chaotic hyperbolic arch, a signal bounce that indicated a solid object or a massive density change, about 4 feet down. It was right in the center of the largest rose bed, directly beneath a bush that was older and thicker than the rest. The Manhoi KY Law was no longer a shoe or a doll. It was a digital ghost on a screen.
Thorne looked at the spot.
It was the heart of the garden, the centerpiece, the place where Arthur would have stood 1,000 times, watering can in hand, looking down at the earth, talking to the silence. The shovels came out. This wasn't the frantic digging of a treasure hunt. This was surgery. The turf was carefully cut in squares and set aside. The topsoil was removed bucket by bucket, sifted through a mesh screen onto a tarp. They were looking for anything, a button, a fiber, a bone fragment. The sound of metal slicing into dirt was rhythmic, hypnotic.
Chunk, scrape, dump, chunk,
Scrape.
dump.
Arthur Vance watched from the porch, his face a mask of stone. The Nuoi Chong Dao Ko act was slipping, replaced by a rigid, terrifying focus. He was watching the depth. He was counting the inches. He knew exactly what was down there, and he was calculating the precise moment his life would end. As they went deeper, the smell changed. The sweet, loamy scent of the potting soil gave way to something denser, something ancient and sour. The clay. The earth that holds secrets tight. At 3 feet, the soil composition shifted. It wasn't the natural red clay of the region. It was lighter, mixed with sand. Someone had amended the soil deep down. Why amend the soil 4 feet under a rose bush? Roots don't go that deep. Unless you're trying to accelerate decomposition. Unless you're trying to hide the smell. Thorne felt the adrenaline spike. This was premeditation. This was the dark double life, manifesting in the dirt. Arthur hadn't just buried them. He had engineered their disappearance. The crowd at the perimeter tape had grown. Neighbors in pajamas, dog walkers, the early morning joggers, they all stood frozen, watching the destruction of the neighborhood landmark. The shock was palpable. They weren't just watching a police search. They were watching their own memories be tainted. They had admired this garden. They had smelled these flowers. Some of them had probably accepted cuttings from Arthur, planting pieces of this crime scene in their own yards. The horror was viral. If bodies were in that soil, then the whole neighborhood was complicit in the cover-up, simply by witnessing the beauty that grew from it. The betrayal stung more than the morning cold. Hold. Dr. Eris's voice was sharp. The digging stopped instantly. She jumped into the pit, now waist-deep, and pulled out a trowel. She brushed away the loose dirt with the tenderness of an archaeologist uncovering a pharaoh. Thorne leaned over the edge, her breath held in her throat. The camera crew from the forensic van moved in, the lens peering into the hole. Eris wasn't looking at a bone. Not yet. She was looking at a layer of plastic. A heavy-duty, industrial trash bag, the black polymer preserved by the lack of oxygen in the clay. It was slick, shiny, an alien object in the natural world. Eris looked up at Thorne, her face pale under the work lights. "It's wrapped," she whispered. "Multiple layers." The implication was clear. This wasn't a hasty burial. This was packaging. The Bienbeau NGO was about to be unwrapped. Thorne looked up at the porch. Arthur Vance was gone. The door was closed. The blinds were drawn. The fortress had sealed itself up. He knew. He knew the plastic had been found. He knew the clock had run out. But he wasn't running. He was inside, in the house that was now a prison, waiting for the inevitable. Thorne turned back to the pit. "Open it," she said. The command was a whisper, but it echoed like a thunderclap. Eris reached for a scalpel. The blade gleamed in the rising sun. She made a small incision in the black plastic. The air that escaped wasn't just trapped gas. It was the breath of 1996. It was the atmosphere of the crime, sealed away for 3 decades. A scent hit them, faint, but unmistakable. Not just decay, but something synthetic. The smell of the bleach. The lavender. The scent Detective Miller had noted in his logbook 30 years ago. It had survived the earth. It had survived the worms. It rose up to meet them, a chemical confession from the grave. The cold case was thawing, and the heat coming off that hole was enough to burn the whole town down. The roses stood watch, silent sentinels over the horror they had been hiding, their petals suddenly looking less like velvet and more like drops of blood. The scalpel sliced through the final layer of polyethylene with a sound like tearing skin, a sharp hiss that cut through the morning bird song. The smell that billowed up wasn't the rot of the grave. It was a chemical preservation, a suffocating cloud of chlorine and floral masking agents that had been marinating in the dark for 10,000 days. Dr. Eris reeled back for a split second, her eyes watering, not from grief, but from the sting of the bleach. It was the olfactory fingerprint of the crime scene, the same scent that had baffled Detective Miller in the kitchen 30 years ago. Arthur hadn't just cleaned the house. He had cleaned the bodies. He had tried to scrub the humanity off them before he committed them to the earth. As the fumes dissipated into the cool morning air, the contents of the black shroud began to take shape. It wasn't a chaotic pile of remains. It was a tableau, a horrifying, staged domestic scene frozen in calcium and synthetic fabric. The first thing to catch the light was the pattern of a dress, faded floral print, the colors muted by the damp, but unmistakably the dress Elena Vance was wearing in the last known photograph of her alive. But it was the positioning that broke Detective Thorne's composure. Elena wasn't thrown in. She was laid out, curled on her side in a fetal position, her skeletal arms wrapped protectively around two smaller bundles. It was a grotesque parody of a bedtime story, a mother putting her children to sleep in a bed of clay. Dr. Eris worked in silence, her brush revealing the truth inch by inch. Beneath the curve of Elena's ribcage lay the remains of the 6-year-old. And there, tucked against the small, fragile sternum, was the answer to the oldest riddle in Crestview. The doll, Eris whispered, her voice cracking. It's here. It wasn't the generic toy Arthur had dismissed in the interrogation room years ago. It was Sophie, the tattered rag doll, its button eyes still staring blankly into the dirt, was clutched in Chloe's skeletal hand. Arthur had buried the child with her comfort object. It was a detail of psychopathic intimacy, a gesture of care from the man who had stopped her heart. He wanted them to be at peace, as long as that peace was 6 feet under his prize-winning roses. But there was a third shape. Tucked behind Elena, as if hiding in her shadow, was the ghost child. The skeleton was larger than Chloe's, the bones of a preteen boy.
Julian.
The DNA hit on the wallpaper was no longer an abstraction. It was a boy wearing a decayed denim jacket, his knees pulled up to his chest. The tragedy of the Biangia Den was laid bare in the dirt. This wasn't a family reunion. It was a massacre of potential. Julian had found his mother, and in doing so, he had walked into a tomb. The Manhoy KY law that linked him to the scene, the backpack, was wedged beneath his legs. It was still zipped. He hadn't even unpacked. He had arrived, he had been seen, and he had been erased. Thorne stared down into the pit, feeling a cold rage that made her hands tremble. She looked at the rose bush that had been uprooted, its roots dangling in the air like severed nerves. Arthur Vance had watered these plants every day. He had pruned them. He had admired their blooms. He had literally feasted his eyes on the beauty fed by the decay of his own family. It was a level of compartmentalization that defied psychiatric explanation. It wasn't just murder, it was farming. He had cultivated a cover story using the biological matter of his victims. The Chandong of this realization would destroy the town. Every person who had ever complimented Arthur's garden would feel the slime of complicity on their skin. "Bag it," Thorne said, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. "Bag everything. The soil, the plastic, the doll. I want every molecule of this pit processed." The crime scene technicians moved in, their white Tyvek suits stark against the brown earth. The reverence of the excavation gave way to the mechanics of justice. The remains were carefully lifted, bone by fragile bone, and placed into evidence bags. The separation of the bodies was the final indignity. After 30 years of clinging to each other in the dark, they were being pulled apart by the state. But it was necessary. The silence of the garden was broken by the zip of body bags, a sound that signaled the end of the mystery and the beginning of the prosecution. Up on the porch, the blinds remained drawn. The house was a monolith of denial. But Thorne knew the dynamic had shifted. Arthur wasn't waiting anymore. He was listening. He could hear the zippers. He could hear the murmur of the coroner's team. The cold case was now a hot crime scene, and the evidence was irrefutable. The bodies were the smoking gun, but the way they were buried, the care, the wrapping, the positioning was the confession. Only a husband and a father buries his victims with their toys. A stranger would have dumped them. A monster would have burned them. Arthur Vance was both, and he was neither. He was something new, a domestic tyrant who believed he had the right to curate his family's existence, even in death. As the coroner's van backed into the driveway to receive its cargo, the sun finally broke through the cloud cover, illuminating the scene in a harsh, unforgiving light. The neighbors, now gathered in a dense crowd behind the yellow tape, went silent. They saw the bags. They saw the size of the bags. One large, two small. The math was simple, and it was devastating. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by the sound of weeping. The SOC Songdong had turned into collective trauma. The myth of the grieving father was dead, replaced by the reality of the gardener who grew his lies in the soil of his own backyard. The lady in the dunes, the boy in the box, these were stories from far away. But this was the house next door. This was the man who borrowed your lawnmower. The proximity of the evil was the hardest pill to swallow. Thorne turned her back on the pit. She had what she needed. The physical evidence was secured. Now came the final act. She walked up the driveway, past the ruined rose beds, past the weeping neighbors, and up the steps to the front door. She didn't knock. She didn't ring the bell. She radioed the SWAT team leader stationed at the perimeter. "Breach," she said. "Take him down." The time for polite investigation was over. The BTAC was shattered. It was time to look the devil in the eye and ask him why. The command breach hangs in the air for a fraction of a second, a kinetic potential energy waiting to snap. Then, the front door of the Vance residence, a solid oak barrier that has locked out the world for 30 years, disintegrates under the force of a battering ram. The sound is a wooden scream, splintering the morning quiet. SWAT officers flood the entryway, their boots thudding against the pristine hardwood floors in a chaotic rhythm. Police. Search warrant. Hands in the air. The shouts are percussive, designed to disorient, to shock the nervous system of anyone inside. But the house doesn't shout back. It absorbs the noise. It swallows the aggression into its heavy, velvet silence. Detective Thorne follows the tactical stack, her weapon drawn, her heart hammering against her ribs. She expects resistance. She expects the desperate, cornered violence of a man who has just watched his life's work, his garden of graves, being dismantled. But as they sweep the ground floor, the BTAC of the situation shifts from physical danger to psychological horror. The living room is empty. The kitchen, with its gleaming countertops and the phantom smell of bleach, is empty. The air conditioner is humming, a low, mechanical drone that chills the sweat on Thorne's neck. It feels like 1996 all over again. The same stillness. The same staged perfection. It's as if the house itself is a loop, trapping everyone who enters in a moment that never passes. Clear left. Clear right. The callouts from the team are sharp, but they lack the adrenaline of contact. They are clearing a museum, not a fortress. Thorne moves to the dining room. The table is set. Not for a meal, but for a display. A vase of fresh roses, cut from the very bushes that were just uprooted, sits in the center, their red petals stark against the white lace tablecloth. It's a taunt. A final message from the gardener. He knew they were coming. He knew the moment the GPR unit rolled onto his lawn that the game was over. And while they were staring into the dirt, mesmerized by the horror of the discovery, he had made his move. The Su That Chandong hits Thorne with the force of a physical blow. Arthur Vance isn't in the house. The man on the porch, the statue of grief they thought they had contained, was a mirage. He had slipped away right under the noses of the entire police force, using the chaos of the excavation as a smokescreen. Upstairs. Go! Thorne yells, sprinting towards the staircase. The banister is polished to a shine, the wood smooth under her hand. The photos lining the wall are a gallery of lies. Elena smiling, Chloe laughing, Arthur looking like the benevolent protector. They mock her as she ascends. The master bedroom door is open. The bed is made with military precision. But on the dresser, amidst the cologne bottles and the perfectly aligned tie clips, something is missing. The Manhoy KY law here isn't what is present, but what is absent. The gun safe in the corner is open, and it is empty. Panic, cold and sharp, spikes in Thorne's chest. A killer with a head start is dangerous. A killer with a gun and nothing left to lose is a catastrophe. He's armed. She radios to the command post. Subject is mobile. Repeat, subject is mobile and armed. The perimeter units are alerted, the net tightening around the neighborhood. But where would he go? A man like Arthur Vance doesn't run into the woods. He doesn't hitchhike. He is a creature of dignity, of appearance. He wouldn't allow himself to be tackled in a ditch. He has a plan. He has a destination. Thorne scans the room, looking for a suicide note, a manifesto, anything. Her eyes land on the bedside table. A leather-bound planner lies open. It's an old-school habit, a relic of a man who never trusted digital clouds. She grabs it, her eyes scanning the date.
Today.
Friday the 13th. The entry for 10 a.m. is written in ink, the handwriting elegant and steady, with no sign of the tremors that should shake a murderer's hand. Interment of Arthur Vance Sr., Oak Ridge Cemetery. The realization freezes the blood in Thorne's veins. The funeral. The arrest at funeral headline flashes in her mind before it's even written. Today isn't just the day the bodies were found. It's the day Arthur's father, the original patriarch of this twisted lineage, is being buried. Arthur isn't running to hide. He's running to perform. He's going to the one place where he can command an audience, where he can wrap himself in the cloak of mourning one last time. He's going to stand by his father's grave, the grieving son, and perhaps end it all in a blaze of tragic glory. The SOC Songdong won't just be the discovery of the bodies, it will be a public execution at a funeral service. He's at the cemetery. Thorne screams into her radio, already turning to run back down the stairs. Oak Ridge. He's going to the funeral. All units converge on Oak Ridge. The house, with its secrets finally exposed, feels like it's expelling them. The Bong Ma Kwa Ku isn't in the walls anymore. It's in a sedan driving through the morning traffic, heading toward a congregation of unsuspecting mourners. The dynamic of the cold case has exploded. It's no longer an investigation, it's a race. A race to stop a man who has already killed 3 people from turning a funeral into a massacre. As Thorne bursts out the front door, the sun is fully up, blinding and indifferent. The forensic van is still there, the body bags being loaded. The neighbors are still watching. But the center of gravity has shifted. The siren wails to life, a banshee scream that tears through the suburban quiet. Thorne jumps into her cruiser, the tires screeching as she peels out of the driveway, leaving the empty house and the ruined garden in the rearview mirror. The road to the cemetery is a ribbon of asphalt stretching out before her, a timeline counting down to 0. The Bienbo NGO is about to have its violent conclusion, not in an interrogation room, but among the tombstones. The radio chatters with frantic updates. Suspect vehicle identified. Black Lincoln town car. Spotted heading northbound on Route 9.
He's not speeding.
He's driving the speed limit.
Of course he is.
He's maintaining the facade until the very end. The Kuok Song Hai Mat of Arthur Vance is holding steady. He is driving to a funeral while his wife and child are being loaded into a morgue van 3 miles away. The dissociation is absolute. Thorne pushes the accelerator to the floor, the engine roaring. The distance to the cemetery is closing, But so is the window of opportunity. They have to catch him before he steps out of that car, before he draws that weapon, before he turns the arrest shocks nation into tragedy at Oak Ridge. The final act of this 30-year play is about to begin, and the curtain is rising on a stage set with open graves. The click of the handcuffs echoing across the silent cemetery was the sound of a dam breaking. Within minutes, the footage of Arthur Vance being led away from his father's grave, head bowed against the rain, was beaming to satellites and bouncing into millions of living rooms. Minnesota 2000 cold case solved flashed across screens, the cheer in a stark red against the gray footage. The SOC Dong rippled outward from Crestview, turning a local tragedy into a national spectacle. The image was undeniable. The pillar of the community, the grieving widower, dragged away in chains while the flowers on his father's casket were still fresh. But the arrest was just the headline. The story, the dark, rotting meat of the why, was still locked inside Arthur's head. Back at the precinct, the atmosphere was electric but suffocating. The interview room was a stark contrast to the lush deception of the garden. Cinderblock walls, a steel table, a two-way mirror that hummed with the presence of the district attorney and half the brass in the state. Arthur sat in the chair, stripped of his suit jacket, shivering slightly in his damp shirt. He looked smaller now. The fortress of his persona crumbled. Detective Thorne sat across from him. She didn't have a folder of evidence. She didn't need one. She just placed a single photograph on the table. It wasn't of the bodies. It was of the bus ticket, the crumpled, stained slip of paper that proved Julian had come home. You didn't expect him, Thorne said softly. It wasn't a question. It was the first brick in the road to the truth. Arthur stared at the ticket. His eyes, usually so guarded, looked wet. He looked just like her, he whispered. The voice was rusty and used to speaking the truth. He had her eyes. Elena's eyes. The confession didn't come in a flood. It seeped out, toxic and slow. Arthur began to weave the narrative of that July night in 1996. It wasn't a premeditated slaughter. It was a collision of two worlds that were never meant to touch. He had come home tired, seeking the sanctuary of his quiet, controlled life. Instead, he found chaos. A strange boy in his kitchen. His wife crying, hysterical, holding a child he didn't know existed. The Giadin had exploded in his face. Arthur was a man who viewed his family as an extension of himself. Perfect, orderly, his. Julian was a variable he couldn't calculate. He was a stain on the picture. He said he was going to stay, Arthur murmured, his fingers tracing the grain of the steel table. He said he was family. He wanted to sleep in Chloe's room.
He was. Loud.
Dirty. The prejudice, the classism, the sheer rigidity of the man bled through. It wasn't just that Julian was Elena's son. It was that he was an intruder from a world Arthur despised. An argument started. Elena defended the boy. She told Arthur she was leaving. She was going to take Chloe and Julian and go. She chose the ghost child over the husband. That was the spark. The loss of control. The realization that his possession was walking out the door. I pushed him, Arthur said, his voice flat. He hit the wall. He didn't get up. The mystery blood on the wallpaper. The accidental death that triggered the massacre. Arthur described the next 10 minutes as a blur of panic and efficiency. Elena screamed. She ran for the phone. He couldn't let her make that call. He couldn't let the world know he had killed a boy in his hallway. So he stopped her. And then Chloe. Chloe had seen it all. She was standing there, clutching Sophie, screaming for her daddy. The monster in the room wasn't a stranger. It was Daddy. To silence the house, he had to silence everyone. The BTAC of the investigation had been fueled by the assumption of a complex crime. But the truth was brutally simple. A domestic dispute turned into a triple homicide in under 15 minutes. The genius, if one could call it that, was in the aftermath. The Manhoy KY law of the red sneaker was a mistake, dropped as he carried Chloe's body out. But the burial, that was where Arthur's psychosis truly bloomed. He couldn't bear to throw them away. They were his. Even dead, they were his. He spent the entire night digging. He used the soil amendments he had bought for the roses. He wrapped them with care. He created a mausoleum where he could visit them, where he could keep them safe, where he could be the only one who knew they existed. The roses? Thorne asked, feeling a wave of revulsion. Why the roses, Arthur? He looked up, and for a second, the gardener was back. His eyes lit up with a terrifying, aesthetic pride. Because they are beautiful, he said simply. And because they need to be fed. I gave them life, and they gave me beauty in return.
It was
a balance. The logic of a madman. He had transformed his guilt into a horticulture project. Every prize ribbon he won, every compliment from a neighbor, was a validation of his secret. He was flaunting his crime in the most public way possible, daring the world to see the rot beneath the petals. The interrogation went on for hours. He detailed the double life, the years of playing the grieving victim while tending the grave of his victims. He admitted to the false hope he gave Elena's parents, the tears he shed at vigils. It was all a performance, a role he played so well he almost believed it himself. But underneath, he was always the warden of the garden, the keeper of the bones. The cold case hadn't been cold to him. It had been alive, growing, blooming every spring. By the time the confession was signed, the sun had set outside. The rain had stopped. Thorne walked out of the interrogation room, her body heavy with exhaustion. This Ciudad Chandong was now a matter of record. The headlines were already shifting from shock to horror. The Rose Garden Killer. The Monster of Crestview. The names were being coined, the legend being written. But Thorne didn't care about the fame. She cared about the silence. The house on the hill was finally truly empty. The garden was dug up. The lies were exposed. She walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, the community was reeling. Neighbors were questioning every interaction they ever had with Arthur. The trust of the town was shattered. But in the morgue, 3 bodies were finally being prepared for a proper rest. Not in a plastic bag under a bush, but in a place with names, with dignity. Julian would finally get his name back. He wouldn't just be a runaway statistic. He would be known. The case was closed. But the story of how a man could cultivate such evil in plain sight would haunt the sleep of the nation for a long time. The BN was solved, but the darkness it revealed was infinite. Thorne turned away from the window. Her job was done. But she knew she would never look at a rose the same way again. The silence of the interrogation room, heavy with the weight of a whispered confession, is shattered the moment the doors of the precinct open. We step out not into the sleepy, rain-slicked streets of Crestview, but into a blinding, chaotic storm of flashbulbs and shouting. The SOC Tsongdong has metastasized into a national obsession. The arrest at the funeral was the catalyst, the visual hook that dragged the world's eyes to this small, quiet town. Now, the satellite trucks are parked bumper to bumper along Main Street, their dishes pointed at the sky like white plastic ears listening for the next grim detail. The story of the Rose Garden Killer has transcended news. It has become folklore, a dark fairy tale blasted out on 24-hour cycles. The cold case is no longer cold. It is white-hot, burning through the privacy and the dignity of everyone who ever knew Arthur Vance. The legal machinery begins to turn, grinding with a slow, tectonic force. The arraignment is held at the county courthouse, a building of red brick and white pillars that usually sees traffic violations and petty disputes. Today, it is a fortress under siege. The lawn is a sea of reporters, true crime tourists, and locals holding signs. Some signs demand justice for Elena. Others, the ones held by the older generation who still can't reconcile the man they knew with the monster on the news, simply ask, why? When the transport van arrives, the crowd surges forward, a single organism driven by a primal need to see the face of evil. But Arthur Vance is hidden behind tinted glass and steel mesh. He is no longer the gardener. He is the state's prisoner, a number, a file, a ghost in an orange jumpsuit. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere is suffocating. The air conditioning struggles against the body heat of the packed gallery. Every bench is full. The jury box is empty. This is just a hearing, but the court of public opinion is in full session. Detective Thorne sits in the front row, her eyes fixed on the door where the defendant will enter. She feels a strange, hollow exhaustion. The thrill of the chase is gone, replaced by the grim administrative burden of proving what she already knows. When Arthur is let in, a collective intake of breath sucks the oxygen out of the room. He looks different. The perfect husband facade has dissolved. Without his tailored suit, without his shears, without the backdrop of his blooming flowers, he looks frail, shrunken. He walks with a shuffle, the shackles around his ankles chiming a discordant rhythm. He doesn't look at the gallery. He doesn't look at the cameras. He looks at the floor, studying the wood grain as if planning a new planting bed. The charges are read. 3 counts of murder in the first degree. 3 counts of unlawful disposal of human remains. 1 count of tampering with evidence. The words hang in the air, clinical and precise, stripping the horror of its emotion and reducing it to legal statutes. The prosecutor, a man whose career will be defined by this case, reads the details of the crime. He speaks of the blunt force trauma, the suffocation, the preservation of the bodies. He speaks of the ghost child, Julian, acknowledging his existence on public record for the first time in 30 years. As the name Julian Miller is spoken, a sob breaks out in the back of the room. It's an old social worker, retired now, who remembers a boy with a backpack and a dream of finding his mother. The tragedy of the BTAC is suddenly human again. It's not just bones in a bag, it's a boy who never got to grow up. Arthur enters a plea of not guilty. It is a formality, a legal maneuver, but it feels like a slap in the face to the town. A collective groan ripples through the room. How can he deny it? We saw the bags. We smelled the bleach. But Arthur's defense attorney, a court-appointed lawyer with the weary look of someone holding back a landslide, begins to spin the narrative. He talks about mental breaks, about dissociative states, about a man pushed beyond his limits by a sudden, shocking intrusion. He tries to paint Arthur not as a monster, but as a tragic figure, a man who broke under the weight of a secret family history he wasn't prepared for. It is a desperate, hollow strategy, but it sows the seeds of the coming trial. The sue that Chandong will have to be fought for, inch by inch, exhibit by exhibit. But the real reckoning isn't happening in the courtroom. It's happening at the funeral home on the other side of town. While Arthur fights for his life, the community is finally preparing to do what should have been done 3 decades ago. The reburial of Elena, Chloe, and Julian. The release of the bodies from the evidence locker is a solemn, bureaucratic procession. They are no longer exhibits. They are people. The coroner has done his best to undo the indignity of the plastic and the chemicals. They are placed in 3 caskets. Elena and Chloe are together again, side by side. Julian, the outsider in life, is given a place of honor next to them. The Bianjia is resolved in death. They are reunited, a broken lineage made whole in the velvet quiet of the coffins. The day of the funeral is starkly different from the rainy, gray day of Arthur's arrest. The sky is a brilliant, piercing blue, the kind of day that feels indifferent to human suffering. The service is held at the same church where Arthur played the role of the grieving widower for 30 years. The irony is sharp enough to draw blood. The pews are packed, but the energy is different. There is no whispering, no speculation. There is only a heavy, crushing sorrow. The community is here to apologize. They are here to atone for the casseroles they baked for the killer, for the sympathy they wasted on the executioner. They are here to mourn the lady in the dunes who was right next door, the children who were reduced to fertilizer for a rose bush. Detective Thorne stands at the back of the church. She watches the faces of the mourners. She sees the guilt etched into the lines of the neighbors' faces. They are asking themselves the question that haunts all cold cases. How did we not know? How did we let a boy walk into that house and never walk out? How did we let a woman vanish into thin air while the air conditioner hummed? The Manhoy KY law wasn't the shoe or the blood. It was the blindness of the suburbs. It was the willingness to believe the pretty lie over the ugly truth. Arthur Vance gave them a performance, and they applauded it for 30 years. Now, they have to bury the reality. The eulogy is delivered by the pastor, a young man who inherited this tragedy along with the pulpit. He speaks of stolen time, of the seasons of grief that never changed. He mentions the doll, Sophie, buried with Chloe. He mentions the bus ticket in Julian's pocket. He paints a picture of a family interrupted, frozen in a moment of potential. And then he addresses the darkness. "We cannot undo the silence," he says, his voice echoing off the stained glass. "We cannot ungrow the garden. But we can plant something new. We can plant the truth." It is a noble sentiment, but as the coffins are carried out into the sunlight, the weight of the past feels heavier than the earth that will cover them. The procession to the cemetery is slow, a river of black cars winding through the streets of Crestview. They pass the Vance house. It sits empty now, surrounded by chain-link fencing, the keep-out signs fluttering in the breeze. The garden has been destroyed, turned into a muddy scar of cratered earth and police tape. The roses are gone, confiscated as evidence or destroyed in the dig. The house looks like a skull, stripped of its skin, staring blankly at the road. The mourners turn their heads away as they pass. They can't bear to look at it. It is a monument to their failure. The Suchandong has faded into a dull, aching scar. The house will likely be torn down. The land will be salted. No one will ever live there again. It is a cursed patch of geography, a place where love was twisted into something unrecognizable. At the graveside, the 3 caskets are lowered into the ground. Not in the backyard, not in secret, but here, in the open, under the gaze of the community and the law. The sound of the dirt hitting the lids is the final punctuation mark on the investigation. Thud, thud, thud. It is the sound of the BTAC breaking for good. Thorne watches as the first shovel of earth is thrown. She feels a hand on her shoulder. It's Dr. Eris, the anthropologist. "They're together," Eris whispers. "That's the only victory we get." Thorne nods. It's a small victory. A Pyrrhic victory. 3 people are dead. A community is traumatized. A man is sitting in a cell, drawing garden plans on the back of his legal pad. But the truth is out. The ghosts have been heard. As the crowd begins to disperse, leaving the fresh mounds of earth covered in lilies, store-bought, plastic-wrapped, safe lilies, not the blood-fed roses of a killer, Thorne lingers. She looks at the tombstone. It hasn't been engraved yet, just a temporary marker. Elena.
Chloe. Julian.
The names look right together. The ghost child is home. The cold case is closed. But Thorne knows that for Crestview, the winter is just beginning. The trial will drag on. The appeals will follow. The Netflix documentaries will be made. The town will be defined by this crime for a generation. They will always be the town where the gardener buried his family. The sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the cemetery. The same cemetery where Arthur was arrested just days ago. The tire tracks from the SUVs are still visible in the mud near his father's grave. The cycle is complete. The father is buried. The son is caged. The victims are free. Thorne turns and walks back to her car. The radio crackles with a dispatch call about a domestic disturbance on Elm Street. Life goes on. The next case is waiting. The next secret is being whispered behind a closed door. The Manhoy KY law is out there, waiting for someone to notice. Thorne starts the engine. She drives away from the dead, back toward the living, back into the noise, leaving the silence of the grave behind her. The satellite trucks eventually leave. They pack up their dishes and their cables, rolling out of Crestview like a circus that has run out of acts, chasing the next tragedy in the next town over. The reporters who stood on Arthur Vance's lawn, breathlessly recounting the horror of the Rose Garden killer, move on to a politician's scandal or a hurricane on the coast. But when the noise fades, the silence that returns to the neighborhood is not the same silence that existed before. It is heavy. It is scarred. It is the silence of a battlefield after the bodies have been cleared. The SOC Tsongdong doesn't end when the verdict is read. It settles into the groundwater, poisoning the well of trust that holds a small town together. The people of Crestview go back to their jobs. They mow their lawns. They wave at their neighbors, but the gesture is hesitant now. There is a shadow behind every smile, a question mark behind every closed door. If Arthur Vance, the man who organized the block parties, the man who brought soup when you were sick, the man whose roses were the pride of the county, could butcher his family and sleep soundly above their bones for 30 years, then who can you trust? The cold case didn't just solve a crime. It shattered a worldview. Arthur Vance's trial was less a legal battle and more a psychological autopsy. He sat in the courtroom day after day, stripped of his gardening shears and his dignity, listening to the state dismantle his life with surgical precision. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He sketched. Throughout the testimony, while the prosecutor held up the tattered remains of Sophie the doll, while the forensic anthropologist described the soil composition of the grave, Arthur drew intricate botanical diagrams on his legal pad. It was the final, chilling act of a narcissist who refused to acknowledge the reality of his situation. He was still the gardener. The courtroom was just another chaotic plot he had to tune out. When the jury delivered the verdict, guilty on all counts, he didn't flinch. He simply finished shading the petal of a sketched rose, closed his pen cap with a definitive click, and stood up to be handcuffed. The judge sentenced him to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. A term for Elena, a term for Chloe, a term for Julian. He would die in a concrete box, far away from the sun, far away from the earth he loved to manipulate. But the true ending of the story didn't happen in the courthouse. It happened on a Tuesday morning, 6 months later, at the house on the hill. The city council had voted. The property was condemned. The murder house was a blight, a magnet for teenagers on dares and ghoulish tourists who stole bricks as souvenirs. It had to go. The demolition crew arrived at dawn, their heavy machinery looking like prehistoric beasts against the suburban skyline. Detective Thorne was there, standing across the street, watching the end of the investigation she had carried like a stone in her chest. The operator of the excavator revved the engine, the hydraulic arm rising into the air like the hand of judgment. The claw smashed into the roof of the master bedroom, the room where Arthur had slept, the room where the gun safe sat empty. The sound of crunching timber and shattering glass echoed through the neighborhood, a violent exorcism of the past. As the walls came down, exposing the interior to the light, the mundane secrets of the house were laid bare. The wallpaper in the hallway, the wallpaper that held the mystery blood, flapped in the wind before being torn away. The kitchen where the pasta had gone cold was crushed into rubble. The structure that had been a fortress of lies for 3 decades was reduced to a pile of debris in less than 4 hours. The neighbors watched from their porches, coffee mugs in hand, their faces grim. There was no cheering, just a collective sense of release. The physical vessel of the evil was gone. The BTAC was finally physically broken. When the dust settled, all that remained was a gaping wound in the earth, a raw patch of red clay where the basement used to be. The garden, Arthur's pride and joy, was the first thing to go. The heavy treads of the bulldozers churned the soil, mixing the prize-winning beds with the debris of the house. The remaining rose bushes, the ones that hadn't been seized as evidence, were ripped out by the roots, their thorny branches snapping like dry bones. It was a brutal, necessary destruction. No one wanted those flowers. No one wanted the beauty that had been fed by death. The Khu Vuan Dia Dang was turned into a landfill. Thorne watched the last rose bush disappear under the tread of a caterpillar track, and she felt a knot loosen in her stomach. The cycle was broken. The harvest was over. Arthur Vance died in prison 4 years into his sentence. It wasn't a dramatic death. He didn't hang himself. He didn't get shanked in the yard. His heart simply stopped. The coroner's report called it natural causes, but those who knew him knew the truth. He died of irrelevance. In prison, he was nobody. He had no audience. He had no garden to control. He was just an old man in a cage, surrounded by concrete and steel, cut off from the cycle of life and death he had appointed himself the master of. He was buried in a prison cemetery, under a marker with a number, not a name. There were no flowers at his funeral. No mourners. No tears. He vanished into the anonymity he had tried so hard to force upon Julian. The universe, in its own cold way, had balanced the scales. Back in Crestview, the seasons turned. The empty lot where the Vance house stood remained vacant for years. The grass grew wild and tall, untamed by human hands. Weeds choked out the remnants of the garden. But then, slowly, nature began to reclaim the space in its own way. Not with the manicured, forced perfection of Arthur's roses, but with a chaotic, vibrant resilience. Wildflowers, goldenrod, dandelion, Queen Anne's lace, began to push through the clay. Birds nested in the brush. The Manhoy KY law of the crime scene faded, replaced by the hum of crickets and the rustle of wind in the tall grass. The town eventually erected a small memorial, not at the site of the house, but in the park downtown. A bench, a plaque, in memory of Elena, Chloe, and Julian. It became a place where teenagers sat to do homework, where mothers rocked their strollers. Life grew around the memory of the dead. Julian's name, carved in bronze, was finally permanent. He was no longer the ghost child. He was a part of the town's history, a boy who came home and, in his own tragic way, stayed forever. Detective Thorne retired a year after the demolition. She packed up her office, the box labeled Vance, now sealed and stored in the permanent archives. She moved to the coast, far away from the clay and the roses. But she never forgot the smell. The scent of bleach and lavender. The scent of wet earth. On quiet nights, when the ocean breeze blows through the window, she still thinks about the B&Bo NGO that sat on a shelf for 20 years. She thinks about the shoe in the hallway. She thinks about the bus ticket. She thinks about the terrifying patience of a man who could wait 30 years to be caught. The Minnesota 2000 cold case is technically closed. The files are digitized. The evidence is stored. But the story lingers, a cautionary tale whispered in the dark. It reminds us that we never truly know what happens behind the closed blinds of our neighbors' houses. It reminds us that evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes, it looks like a grieving husband tending to his flowers. It warns us that the most beautiful gardens often have the deepest, darkest roots. And sometimes, if you listen closely to the wind blowing through the empty lot on the hill, past the wild grass and the scars in the earth, you can almost hear it. Not the screams, not the sirens, but the faint, rhythmic sound of a shovel hitting the dirt.
Chunk, scrape, dump.
A reminder that the past is never truly buried. It is just waiting for the rain to wash away the topsoil, waiting for the right season to bloom, waiting for the truth to push its way up through the dark, cold earth, reaching for the light. This has been the story of the Rose Garden Killer. A story of love twisted into possession, of a family erased and recovered, and of a cold case that finally, after 30 years of winter, found its spring. The file is closed. The garden is gone. But the ghosts. The ghosts are finally free.